Eurasia, the world's largest landmass. Some 10,000 kilometers from the Pacific to the Atlantic Oceans. A formidable distance even in today's world. And yet over that vast distance, human beings have pursued one of history's greatest enterprises. The Silk Road. A tremendously profitable trade route, and so much more. For thousands of years, exotic goods, new technologies, conquering armies, and brilliant ideas traveled along the Silk Road. Silk Road trade helped to build empires and to break them. It fanned the fires of revolution, drove great explorations, and forged powerful bonds between faraway peoples.
The Silk Road made human beings realize that there are other people out there, and it opened the eyes of the East and the West.
This is the story of how Silk Road trade made so much more than money. It's the epic tale of how the Silk Road helped create a world that created us. It was also a new era for the Silk Road. A fortune in Roman gold traveled east in exchange for Chinese silks. And the Central Asian kingdom of Kushan made its own fortune selling another luxury to China: jade. Silk Road caravans passed through this border station on China's western frontier. So many of them carried Kushan jade that this station became known as the Jade Gate. Chinese aristocrats coveted jade for its beauty and something more. They believed that jade would keep them alive forever. The ruling elite commissioned jade burial suits to preserve their bodies in the grave.
They believe that upon death, all the orifices should be plugged in to preserve the spirit inside the person. And this notion of jade as a material with protective power in the afterlife is further enhanced by the fact that they built an armor made of thousands of pieces of jade. And of course, if you're the emperor, your jade armor would be made from the finest jade from the western regions.
During the Roman Empire, Silk Road trade flourished as Chinese, Persian, and Kushan armies kept the trade routes open across Eurasia. China had leveled the battlefield with nomad raiders from the steppes. But Central Asian horse archers were about to carve their names on history. In the 4th century CE, Europe was invaded by a Central Asian people whose name still evokes barbaric cruelty. The Huns, who fought their way west all the way to Rome. European peoples like the Goths and Visigoths, the so-called barbarians, fled before their onslaught and sought refuge in Roman territory. When the Huns withdrew from the Roman world, those barbarian refugees stayed. And the rest is history. The Western Roman Empire was plunged into chaos. As barbarian tribes, dissatisfied with their lot, rebelled against Roman authority, and weak Roman emperors failed to crush them. As Rome declined, migrating horse archers called the Avars carved their own country out of Eastern Europe, bringing with them another Asian military innovation: the stirrup. This Chinese statue from the 4th century CE is the earliest known depiction of stirrups. Some 300 years later, an Avar horseman was riding with these stirrups across Hungary. By the 8th century CE, the stirrup had spread from one end of Eurasia to the other, and mounted warfare was entering a new era.
The importance of the stirrup relates to what kinds of weapons can you use from horseback. And it made it possible to use certain kinds of weapons from horseback that you couldn't use without stirrups. Those weapons are the long saber. You have to lean over and absorb shock if you're going to use a long saber in battle. And the stirrups allow the rider to absorb the shock of contact with a stationary target. The other big weapon that was possible with stirrups was a seated lance held under the arm. You could stab somebody with the lance and then remove it, riding past them without stirrups. But if you seated it under your arm and used the lance as a shock weapon, it would knock you off the back of the horse if you didn't have stirrups. So stirrups made it possible to use long swords and lances as shock weapons against stationary targets and keep your seat. And of course, that made it possible to have really heavy mounted warriors.
Now the rider becomes a unit with the horse. He's so anchored with his stirrups, anchored with this, and then with his long lance, he becomes a single projectile unit. Man, horse, saddle, lance, all locked together for the impact charge. This was the age of the medieval knight.
A medieval knight's power came from combining the Asian stirrup and the ancient shock tactics of the Persian cataphract with a European invention: articulated plate armor. Strong enough to protect the wearer from sword and lance thrusts, while light enough to allow him to move freely on horseback and on foot. Heavy cavalry had never been a more potent weapon of war.
Medieval mounted warfare could be warfare that generated a lot of force on the rider, high-impact warfare. In that case, the mounted warrior is being used really as a shock weapon to strike the enemy.
But even Europe's formidable mounted knights would be outfought by Central Asian cavalry that burst out of the steppes and changed the world.
The largest conquest empire that the earth has ever seen was created by pastoral nomads from Central Asia.
In the 13th century, the Mongols conquered as far west as Poland and as far east as the Sea of Japan. Mongol armies combined the devastating shock tactics of horse archers with a highly sophisticated military organization.
它可以迅速地组织兵力，可以投放到较为远的这种战场，然后可以迅速地到达敌方还没有设备的战场啊，给对方的这个心理上，还是他的无论是在心理上还是他的准备上，以巨大的这种震慑力。来如天坠，去如遁世，就是来的时候就像从天上落下，突然出现，啊，走的时候呢就好像突然间消失一样，啊，完全没有踪迹。当时这个西方人呢，在这个尤其是欧洲的这个史学家在记载这个当时的蒙古军作战方式的时候，就说，先开始啊，他只是在这个天边的几个小点儿，啊，可是却突然间就能像黑云一样出现在你的面前，就是讲究这种就是这个出其不意的突然进攻。
The Mongols have gone down in history as bloodthirsty killers. But they were also sophisticated, open-minded, often generous conquerors. They pacified the Silk Road. Trade between West and East flourished under this Mongol-enforced peace, the Pax Mongolica.
Before the age of Pax Mongolica, banditry was a very serious problem for traders, for caravans along the Silk Road. The reputation of Genghis Khan and his descendants created peace and safe passage along the Silk Road because bandits were so afraid of the Mongol soldiers.
The Pax Mongolica, the control of trade and exchange that was made possible under the Mongols, connected China with Europe and with the Near East in a really close way for the first time in world history. And that had a profound effect on the development of European civilization.
Protected by the Pax Mongolica, and anxious for good relations with the Mongol Empire, Europeans began traveling east as never before. Merchants, missionaries, and diplomats flowed east along the trade routes, bringing back popular Asian goods like cloth and spices, and tales of the wealth and wonders of the East, some true, some fabulous, but all fascinating. From Europe to China, Silk Road trade spread new knowledge of faraway lands.
The Silk Road made human beings realize that there are other people out there, and it opened the eyes of the East and the West.
The Italian cities of Venice and Genoa reaped huge rewards. Their merchants traveled safely throughout Eurasia and founded trading posts on the Black Sea to receive and pass on Silk Road goods. Their Silk Road profits funded magnificent art and architecture. But their competition frequently plunged them into war with one another. In one of these wars, Genoa captured a prosperous Venetian merchant named Marco Polo. Imprisoned by the Genoese, Polo dictated the story of his Silk Road journey to China to a fellow prisoner. Today, experts debate whether Marco Polo really visited China or was simply retelling stories he'd heard from fellow Silk Road travelers. But there's no debate that the Travels of Marco Polo was one of the most influential books in all of human history. It tantalized Europe with tales of China's immense wealth and advanced civilization. And years before Marco Polo was telling those tales in a Genoese prison, a Chinese invention was making its way across Eurasia to the west. Something created centuries earlier when an experiment ended very badly. Ancient Chinese alchemists prepared potions of lead or mercury for their aristocratic patrons, who believed that drinking these metals would help them live forever. Instead, those concoctions killed them or made them insane. Another deadly combination was sulfur heated with an organic nitrate found in soil throughout China, known today as saltpeter. When alchemists experimented with this formula, it burst into flame, injuring the alchemists and burning down their laboratory. From that disaster was born a chemical mixture like none other. It may have failed as an elixir of immortality, but it would prove to be a potent agent of death. This Chinese Buddhist scroll, dating from around 950 CE, depicts demons surrounding a seated Buddha. One demon holds what the Chinese called a hua chang, or fire lance. It's the earliest known image of a weapon powered by that deadly mixture of saltpeter and sulfur. Known to history as gunpowder. In the early 13th century, the Mongols attacked China's Qin dynasty. The Qin dynasty's army fought back with exploding gunpowder bombs. But as the Mongols conquered more and more of China, Han Chinese artillerymen joined their armies and marched west, bringing their gunpowder weapons with them. The Mongols attacked Russian and Polish cities with exploding firebombs. And Europeans found out the hard way what gunpowder could do. By the end of the 13th century, the formula for gunpowder was known as far west as England. And Europeans were inventing their own versions of the new weapons. It wasn't long before this Chinese invention changed European history. On 26 August 1346, near the village of Crécy in northern France, the armies of France and England prepared to fight. Mounted on their war steeds, encased in their armor, the flower of French nobility formed their battle line. While the English deployed a very different force. Thousands of expert archers. The French sent their hired Genoese crossbowmen to attack the English before French knights annihilated them. But the English king, Edward III, had spent years training his longbowmen. And all that training was about to pay off.
Nothing like this had been seen on a Western battlefield up to this time. The first time that a volley of arrows was unleashed by the archers at Crécy would have represented something completely new to many of those in the French army watching it. A cloud of arrows descending towards them. It would have been frightening and, of course, the effect almost immediate.
Showered by English arrows, the Genoese turned and ran. And according to medieval accounts of the battle, they were also panicked by another English weapon.
Giovanni Villani, writing very soon after the battle, says in his chronicle that so loud and intimidating was the noise created by the guns that they thought God was thundering.
The English guns cast iron balls by means of fire. They made a noise like thunder and caused much loss in men and horses.
Noise like that would have been unprecedented to the soldiers on the battlefield. Nothing in their lives could have prepared them for a bang of that size, and accompanied by smoke and acrid sulfur smell which would hang in the air. The impact of which, of course, they couldn't see until men around them dropped. Not even professional soldiers like the Genoese would have experienced anything like this before in their lives. That would have been terrifying. And it's no wonder that they scattered and ran.
They turned and fled into the face of the oncoming French cavalry charge. The French cavalry were now coming onto the battlefield, and they were appalled at these people they had hired running away. And they cursed them and they rode into them, and as many Genoese fell to French hooves as they did to English arrows and gunshots. And the French knights, all 12,000 of them, double the size of the English army, they came charging down onto the English. And they too fell to the English arrows and the English gunshot. And they came again and again and again. 15, 16 times they came. And their horses were ripped to shreds, and the men were thrown from their horses. And those that weren't thrown, they had the opportunity that the dagger men rushed in and they brought these knights down. This was a moment in history where the world changed. It spelled the beginning of the end for the medieval knight.
The Battle of Crécy has gone down in history as one of the earliest uses of gunpowder weapons on a European battlefield. Some 500 years after it burned down a Chinese alchemist's workshop, gunpowder had become Destiny's weapon of choice. After Crécy, it was only a matter of time until the fates of peoples and nations were decided by the gun. Within 2 centuries, Europeans would use their powerful gunpowder weapons to dominate the world. Creating empires that would evolve into today's global trading culture, which binds people together by commerce instead of the gun. But before Europe could embark on its empire-building adventure, its medieval social order would be shattered by a catastrophic event. One that would forge a new Europe in a crucible of horror. While guns thundered at Crécy, something else was spreading along the Eurasian trade routes. Something that would kill tens of millions of Europeans. An apocalyptic destruction of human life that would lay the foundations of the modern world.